Alright. Hello. And welcome to another video on my channel. I'm entitling this one Palestinianism and why it is a real and why it is an obstacle to real and lasting peace and coexistence. So I know. And I'm wearing my my shirt that I got from my cousin. So anyway, it's kind of a big topic. There's a lot to go over, so let's just dive right in, shall we? So let's start out with, obviously, a definition. What is Palestinianism? What am I talking about? Is that a new religion? What is it? So Palestinianism is an ideology that has multiple components to it. It has religious components, it has what it claims to be historical, nationalistic components, historical, it has nationalistic components to it. And what it is it's an ideology basically that says there's these people on this land called Palestine that they live in and on, and they are Palestinians, and they are the native inhabitants of that land going back for thousands of years, clearly documented, and that's their home, that's where they live. And sometime around, I don't remember exactly when, but I do know it was during the second phase of Islamic expansion. I can't remember the exact dates and years for it. By the way, if anybody wants to know if anybody would like any source material or anything for any of this, I'm not necessarily going to list it at the end of every video, but I might list some of it, but it's a lot, so I'm not going to list all of it. But if you want, I can send it to you directly, if you would like. But so, okay, so when these, I believe it was the second phase of the Islamic expansion was happening, and the Muslims came to Israel and they conquered it. And at the time, Israel was populated by a very diverse group of mostly Christians, I think, at that point. And there were Muslims there already, that had already moved in as individual families and stuff to Israel at that point. But it didn't really become part of like the Ummah, the Muslim like world, until the expansion in the second phase of Islamic expansion. And that is when I want to say sorry. Okay, so that was when the Islamic governor of Israel, because the way it worked is as the Muslims expanded and spread their caliphate, their Islamic empire, there was people who were successors from Muhammad as the leaders. And that's actually where the split between Sunni and Shia comes from. The Sunnis, who are the majority of Muslims, believe that the proper ruler, the proper leader of the caliphate, should be a person who's a particularly pious and knowledgeable Muslim who knows the Quran, who knows the Hadiths, which are the stories and sayings of Muhammad, which is basically like the Quran's like the core, and then the Hadiths are sort of like they fill out the details that the Quran doesn't delve into. Kind of like with the written and the oral Torah in Judaism, very similar sort of thing. But so, not everybody agreed though. Some people thought that only members of Muhammad's family were divinely entitled to be leaders. So the third caliph was Ali, who was actually Muhammad's nephew, and the Shias believed that he was the first and right caliph, and that the others were wrong. And even though, and the term in Arabic, Shia, it comes from an Arabic phrase which means party of Ali. Um, kind and that and yeah and so even though that's a political difference between them, over time it's turned into various cultural and theological and ideological differences as well. But originally it was just like it was a political dispute. But anyway, that's not what we're here to talk about exactly though, but it is important to know. So then, when Israel became in charge of the Muslims, and it was in charge of various Muslim dynasties, the Mamluks, the Almohads, and eventually it came, for our purposes, for what we're talking about here, it came under the rule of the Turks, of the Ottoman Empire, which was the empire in control of the land before the British, and the British were the ones in control of the land before the Jews in 1948. So what happened was, well, after the Ottomans had conquered the area had long been heavily Arabized and Islamicized, and the Dome of the Rock, which in every picture of Israel you always see the big gold dome, which was where the temple stood, the Jewish the temple in Jerusalem, and the Dome of the Rock was built shortly after the land was conquered by Muslim forces. And the reason this was done is, in Islam, when they conquer places, and I'm not saying all Muslims or anything like, oh, we should hate anybody. No, I'm just talking about the history. When Islamic armies would conquer a territory, they would erect a mosque or some sort of holy place, and if they could, they'd find some sort of justification for it. For example, Iran is filled with Shia holy sites, which the Sunnis couldn't care less about. And this was sort of the same thing, because it's their way of like saying, this is our land now. This is Dar al-Islam. This is Islamic land now. And so of course they did that, and they built the Dome of the Rock. And then over the centuries, this story was developed, which, by the way, is not in the Quran, nor clearly stated in any of the hadiths, although there is sort of, if you want to get some wiggle room, you can argue some of the hadiths, kind of, but certainly not in the Quran, nothing explicitly saying this. But this legend developed that, now this part is part of the Quran, but that Muhammad went on a journey, a night journey, where he went from, and in the Quran it only says the farthest mosque, or the mosque that is away, like the farthest, or the mosque on the corners, like on the edges. And the idea and the legend is that he was carried on his winged, he had like a mystical, magical winged horse. Yes, I'm not doing a joke or a gimmick. This is what Islam teaches. It might sound kind of weird or funny to us because it's so weird. Yeah, I mean, because it's so new to us. But so that was his winged horse, Baruch, and he rode on Baruch to the Temple Mount, and from there he was then taken up to heaven, and he was given a tour of heaven. I don't think that it was saying that that God, himself gave Muhammad the Torah. I think it may have been the angel Gabriel, just like angel Gabriel was the one that delivered the messages to Muhammad, in the cave of oh, what's it called? The cave. I want to call it the cave of Hira. Yeah, in the cave of Hira, which on the night of power, which was the first beginning of the revelations of what eventually was written down and then compiled into the Quran. Um, and so he went on this journey, and then he then was down on. He came back to the earth, and present were all the prophets: Moses, Jesus. I think King David's one of their prophets. I'm not sure. I'm pretty sure he is. Um, and God said, or maybe it was Gabriel. I think in this case it was God himself who said, the greatest prophet, lead the evening prayers, lead all the other prophets in the evening prayers. And nobody knew what to do. Nobody moved forward. Muhammad wasn't entirely sure what to do, but he just sort of went out on a limb and he stepped forward, and God said, this is the one who is pleasing to Allah, and he led the other prophets in the evening prayers before returning to Baruch and flying back to Arabia. Now, this story, it's not in the Quran. There's no sources for this, like in the hadiths that are very clear. Like, again, there are some hadiths that kind of sound similar to this, but again, we're not here to talk about Islam in general. We're here to talk about Palestinianism. But all of this information is relevant and important to understand the overall idea of Palestinianism. So now that that's all, we got through all that part. So what happened was Jews started moving into the land and started making purchases of real estate, farming land that they bought from the Arabs in like the mid to late 1800s. And this was the very beginning of the Zionist movement. Now, the way that people would like you to see it, the way certainly liberal historians and anti-Israel historians would like you to see it, they would like you to see it as like almost as though the Jews were persecuted in Europe, and so to make it up to them, they were given Palestine by the British, or by the British, and then the modernized Europeanized Jews and the modern Western British, who together were linked, then cruelly conquered the land from the native Palestinian Arab Muslims and stole it from them and drove them out. Now, that's not at all what the history is, because, for example, they were already starting to make purchases, and there's towns that were founded, Jewish towns that were founded all the way back in the 1880s and the 1890s from these people who were just Jews from various countries: Russia, Poland, Germany, from all over Europe, and they were moving there, and they were just buying property and land. They weren't conspiring together to kick the Arabs out. No, they were just living there, and it was relatively peaceful. I mean, because it was remember, it was not under Arab rule at the time. It was under the rule of the Ottomans. They are Muslims, true, but they're not Arabs. They're Turks. Turks and Arabs are very different people. They're different ethnicities. Yes, they're all Muslim, but to put them together as such would be as ignorant as going, well, somebody from England is Church of England, and somebody from Ghana, Africa is Orthodox Ethiopian or whatever. So they're basically the same because they're both Christians. You know, it's ludicrous. So the Turks and Arabs are very different cultures, um, and so they had the Ottoman Empire, and then World War One happened, and the Ottoman Empire fell, and then the area was divided up to the Allies, one of which were the British, who then took control of the area, which historically was Israel. What they did was they actually took over the area between the river to the sea that we today know as Israel, but they also took over parts of Syria, and all of Jordan, the entire country of Jordan. All of that was united as one under the British, and that was called the British Mandate of Transjordan and Palestine. Now, the thing is about that is, what is this Palestine then? Where'd that come from? Well, before, when the Ottomans ruled it, they called it Palestine. And then before the people before them, the Almonads, the Mamluks, all those people, it was known as Palestine. So what is Palestine? Where did this name come from? I mean, it's not from the Muslims, because Palestine isn't mentioned once in any hadith, and it's certainly not mentioned in the Quran. In fact, what's really interesting, even the word Palestine or Palestinian is not translatable into Arabic, because there's no P. In Arabic, there's no letter P. There's F. So if you listen when Palestinians talk, unless they're talking in English to Americans or whatever, they never call it Palestine. You know, how Betty, welcome to Palestine. It's like there's a Saturday Night Live sketch where they're making fun of Trump, and he with the train crash in that town, Middle America, East Palestine, and he gets up and he goes, "It's nice to be here in East Palestine. Not a great name." But anyway, in Arabic, when they talk about it, they don't call it Palestine, they call it Philistine. That's the Arabic name for it. And what is Philistine? It's Palestine in Arabic. Its origin is not in Arabic, though. What's the origin of this term? So a lot of people know, and I've heard the anti-Israel people love to deny this. They love to say, "Oh, that's not true. That can't be backed up. There's no source." I can give you 3 sources off the top of my head. The Wars of the Jews by Josephus, various parts of the Old and New Testament, and the Dead Sea Scrolls, all of which testify to this. And what this is that this I'm referring to is the following. After the Second Temple was destroyed by Titus, by the Roman general Titus, as punishment of the Jews for starting the Bar Kokhba revolt, which was a major rebellion against the Roman Empire, by which the Jews tried to, and failed to, throw off the word intifada, that you hear, globalize the intifada, which is actually a really terrifying concept, but we'll get to that. The very notion of the word intifada means to violently shake off, and that's, ironically, that's what the Jews did to the Romans. They tried to violently shake and throw the Romans off their land, off our land, and they failed, and the Romans, did not take kindly to that sort of thing, and they destroyed the Second Temple, and 980,000 Jews were exiled throughout the Roman Empire, and that is why there's a Jewish diaspora. That's why can be found in all kinds of places all over the world. Some places were bigger communities and clusters than others,